It is April 1st, beginning of a new month, finished the first quarter, and it is officially April Fool's Day. And actually, real time in a chat where we are dropping some April Fool's bombs. So if I get distracted here at any point, forgive me in advance. I grew up with a mother that absolutely loves April Fool's Day. She loves it more than your mother, for sure. And so we are always on very high guard during this time. And so this morning we decided to strike first. We decided to lay the first blow because you can't be on defense all day. I can defend my posture and not answer her phone calls and not respond to any negative news. So if you want to deliver me negative news today, do it. I will not respond. I will not believe you. Just how I'm built that way. So I want to dive in. We had a great day yesterday with some of our agents out at Toll Brothers Community, America's luxury home builder. Short plug there for Toll Brothers. They do a great build, but we were at one of their communities and I had a bunch of our agents, a bunch of our newer agents there as well, and had the opportunity to really allow them to discuss with the sales rep in an open forum, like help us understand how we can benefit our customers and bring them into new construction in the easiest possible way. Obviously, if it's a good fit for them, but also helping them understand the nuances of new construction over and above a traditional resale, which many people are used to, because there are so many differences from community to community, from builder to builder, what's included, what's not included, what fees you need to be planning for, how you need to account for taxes, what they are today and what they are at some point in the future. Boom, just got an update here on, I'll let you guys know if this turns into anything. It's going to be great. And so we had the chance to just really speak openly and say, like, if you get a new agent, how do you walk into a new construction community and really make sure you feel like you're representing your customer well, but also avoid what many people do, and they feel this need to over manage that process. And I think that's a insecurity that comes out in a lot of agents, maybe where they're like, man, if this is a good fit, like I've got to go negotiate extra things for them, and I've got to do this and I've got to do that, to the point where many times they actually kill a deal. And the buyer's like, no, I'm happy with this. I want this. Thank you for helping me understand the market, for being there with me, working to make sure I'm protected. But, we don't want to kill the deal for our customers. And so one of the things we talked about was, what are the things that a new builder, a new construction community are willing to negotiate? What are the things that maybe in time they would be willing to, depending on the market, depending on the activity they're getting in the community, how willing are they going to be to negotiate? And it's important to put yourself in the mind of the builder. And I laid it out this way, and this translates to existing construction as well. The demand the home or the community is getting is going to drive the willingness to negotiate. Fair? Like if you have a lot of people interested in a house, the willingness for the seller or the builder to negotiate is going to be less. Seems rather obvious, but we've got to make sure we step back and view it through that perspective so that we can set expectations for our customers. If you set the expectation for your customer that they're going to give you this and they're going to give you that, and then you go in and you can't get that, you look like a failure, you feel like a failure, and the customer's unhappy, feels like they got the rug pulled over their eyes, whatever, right? We want to avoid those things by setting proper expectations. And so one of the things that was that we discussed was early on in the process. Like let's say a new construction community is opening, they're doing a grand opening, they're releasing their first batch of lots. Are they going to be more or less willing to negotiate to get the first batch of lots sold? Like they need to get some sales on the books. They actually are incentivized to open up and sell a bunch of things fast so they can say, we just went to market, we've already got half of our inventory locked up under contract. Here's what doesn't happen at that point. They don't release what those sold for. And so you've got to understand the psyche. The psyche would say that they get to posture as if this is in complete demand, which it probably is because it's new and it's shiny. But the fact that they get to post something as pending and under contract, even though it's not going to close they're not even breaking ground on anything yet. You might be a year and a half out from actually posting a sale. But is that going to drive momentum for the community? Yes. And so understanding that allows you to say, okay, what kind of weight do we have to throw around in today's market? But once they've done that and you're in batch 2 and they've really established what the demand is, where the price needs to be, what they've got to include, the incentives they got to include, et cetera, what does that change? That changes a lot because they're no longer They're no longer betting on what the market's going to do. That's what you do before you go to market. Once you're in the market, you know exactly how the market's responding. So I believe, for the most part, not exclusively true, but I believe builders are going to be the most negotiable on the beginning and on the end when they're trying to get the heck out. They're trying to get their sales center out, sold, move their people to a new community. They are ready to lock it up. But you've got to understand what they're doing the entire time through is they are setting each new sale based on the previous sale, right? What you're going to hear people say is they just increase their price so much every month. That may be true. That may be what's happening on the surface, but what's happening below the surface is they know the details of the contracts. They know the details of what sold next door, and they are trying to make sure that guy's not underwater before he actually moves into his house. That's important to them. And it should be. Like, if you're delivering a product, you don't want people to be underwater. So understand that component of it. So it's important for us to approach these things so that we can set expectations properly for our buyers. Same will be true if we're representing a seller for resale. Expectations is the thing that drives, I think, the most challenges and frustrations with realtors. I have to get involved in a lot of these scenarios sometimes when expectations were not met. And usually it's because they were never set. But let's talk about this through the lens of a resale. And then I'm going to jump into some couple stories of the day. In a resale, if you are representing a seller and you're the only one active on the market, but there's another one that's pending on the market, what is the psyche of the potential buyers in the market? The psyche is potentially, man, things in the neighborhood sell fast. There's not a lot available. We should probably move pretty quickly if we want to make a move on this, right? Being able to control that narrative is a big deal. So think about these things so that you can use them to your benefit when you're representing a seller. Now, the other thing you need to know is if that's actually going to post and close before you do, or before you go to appraisal, what that actually sold for probably will matter. So it's important when you are negotiating. I don't care if you're on the buyer side, if you're on the seller side, he with the most information, he or she, with the most information wins. He who controls that narrative and has the background data on how many people have actually shown, how many people have the feedback you've actually been given on your listing, what the other things in the neighborhood have sold for, and not just sold for, but the terms for which they've sold. One of the things I mention all the time if we're sitting with a seller and we're talking about maybe, the kind of a full market analysis, one of the things we are privy to based on MLS data is the terms of the contract. Not all of the terms, but we are told what it sold for, what the concessions were. And then I think it's critical to go back and look when it listed in the first place, the market in which it listed, how fast it went to contract. Was there a fall through or no fall through? Was there a potential appraisal issue and renegotiation? Those are things we can gain if we are doing our job and talking to the other agents. And so when we flash this over to the side of the new construction, they have all of that information. And that's why they generally are going to win in a negotiation, because they have all of the information for which to negotiate. So I know it's kind of a deep and fairly short. We could go much longer on this, but a way to kind of simplify what's actually going on in a lot of these conversations. So I want to dive into two opposing stories cut from the same set of facts. This is specific to Florida. Ooh. All right. Florida's real estate gold rush draws super rich as rising costs push out others. The casual observer, everything in South Florida's real estate garden is looking rosy. There's a gold rush in Miami as ultra wealthy buyers snap up mega mansions and luxuriously appointed condos as soon as they hit the market. The Guardian has also reported recently on the Mamdani effect of elite New Yorkers arriving in the Sunshine State with bulging pocketbooks in search of high-priced escape from the city's new mayor. How interesting. We saw that coming from a mile away. Yet, alongside the boom, there are rumblings of more troubling parallel reality. Undoubtedly, the billionaire class is helping to pump even more dollars into an already thriving economy. But as prices rise and less affluent find everything from housing and insurance to gas and groceries increasingly expensive, many are considering doing something about it. So a recent poll by Florida Atlantic University showed at least half of the state's residents were thinking about leaving because of the cost of living, with 80% of those citing concerns with housing affordability. Evidence pointing toward trouble to come is more than just anecdotal. Significantly above average housing costs in many areas have helped propel Florida into top 10 most expensive states to live in. In the popular metropolitan region incorporating Miami and Fort Lauderdale, where new built condos can reach well into the tens of millions of dollars, is also notoriously house poor. It has 3 cities in the top 6 of Consumer Affairs report into affordability, where the percentage of household income spent on housing is 32% or above, compared to the national average of 24%. Let me just welcome all Miami-Dade, Fort Lauderdale, Broward County people to Orlando. Come north. Been increasingly expensive here too, but we don't even touch that with a 10-foot pole. Come here. Off my soapbox. Here we go. Floridians believe in the American dream, but they are paying for it dearly, said Monica Escarales, chair of FAU's Department of Economics. She said that in a statement accompanying the poll. The Florida promise of sun, growth, and upward mobility remains alive, but it's getting expensive to hold on to. I think everybody here feels that just a little bit. It's certainly thought-provoking, and a lot of wealthy people are moving in as they are going to displace the lower income and middle income folks, he said. It's definitely an interesting question. I don't think that our data shows that, but I guess the shocking thing from our survey was that a lot of people were considering leaving Florida. One of the things, the post-COVID realities is how many people living in South Florida want to remain in South Florida, but they're considering leaving because their mobility of job now is a reality of life. We can go to the most inexpensive places and still maintain a level of income. Maybe it doesn't touch where you need to be in Miami, but maybe it's ample for many other states. I'll go on. The steady flow into Florida of new residents also appears to have slowed. A 2025 migration pattern study by Atlas Van Lines survey recorded an almost equal split between number of arriving and leaving. Between 23 and 24, 1,200 people a day were moving in, according to a separate consumer affairs study. More recent estimates reflect a sharp slowdown to about 500 per day net moving in, net migration to Florida. It finishes with this. He said he also believed developers had a moral obligation to the communities in which they choose to build. I'll be interested for thoughts and feedback on this. The price point we're setting starts around 400 to 500, so local people would definitely be able to afford living and buying in the building, he said. But in general, the entire aspect of affordability in the city is an important one, and it goes beyond affordability and into livability. What is extremely important for Miami to evolve as one of the great 3 cities next to New York and Los Angeles is education, improving that from kindergarten to schools to universities. With affordable and accessible education, a certain amount of upskilling of people takes place, which helps them get access to good jobs that will help them with the affordability in the long run. Also, super important is the investment in infrastructure, affordable housing, public transport, healthcare. With the growth that Miami has seen and with the challenges Miami has with traffic, education, the availability of housing, this really needs to be a core focus of the public administration and business people that contribute to investments in all of these sectors. So what do you think about that? Do you think developers have a moral obligation to the communities in which they serve? I don't know. I thought it was an interesting position, although I think we all subconsciously would like that to be true. All right, let's go into this other article here. Red flags everywhere. Florida housing reports signal a 2026 crash as inventory soars and prices sink. Analysts tracking statewide trends say inventory in several major metros has surged by more than 70% compared to the last. While price cuts are becoming more common, some national housing researchers warn these patterns could point to a sharp correction in 2026 if conditions don't stabilize. Miami, Tampa, and Cape Coral are drawing the most attention. I love not being mentioned in some of these articles. These cities saw some of the fastest price growth in the country during the pandemic boom. Now, they are showing some of the steepest slowdowns. One Redfin analysis found that roughly 42% of active listings in parts of South Florida saw price reductions this winter, a sign that sellers are struggling to attract buyers in a cooling market. It's also fine to say that we are struggling to find where the market value is. And I think in a lot of markets, that is a challenge. Some sellers don't have to sell. We see this consistently where sellers don't have to sell. They want to sell and they're willing to sell for a certain price. Otherwise, we'll keep it, right? And so we have a lot of buyers, and I would presume in the South Florida market where they have seen the steepest, they have the most, massive amount of equity. They have the ability to not sell as well, right? So that's where I struggle with a lot of these articles that start to take a snippet like that, 42% of active listings in parts of South Florida saw price reductions this winter and say, we're heading for a sharp, market change. I feel like that's a little bit of a stretch. Let's continue. What's driving the inventory surge? Real estate agents say the jump in inventory is coming from several directions. Homeowners who held off selling during the pandemic are finally listing. If they owned pre-pandemic, they have the ability to sell. They've got enough equity to be able to sell, right? If they choose to not sell at today's market, that does not show that we are in a steep drive. However, some of these sellers could still take a nice chunk of change off the table, a nice bit of equity, and still undercut the market today, right? So that's where you could start to see a pattern of sales that lead itself to seeing a market adjustment. Homeowners who held off selling during the pandemic are finally listing. Investors who bought properties to flip or rent are backing out as carrying costs rise. New construction, especially in Southwest Florida, is hitting the market at the same time demand is softening. So these are interesting articles because they're hyper-focused around the area that saw the greatest rise through the post-pandemic and post-pandemic era. And then we are projecting where they are going to land, right? And so when we look at these markets and we look at these markets who have thrived, we expect a rebalance. Does a rebalance equate to a signal of a 2026 crash as inventory soars and prices sink? What would constitute as a crash? Would a 10% price correction constitute as a crash? Does some people get caught up in that and we see some foreclosure? Yes, because some people bought and over-leveraged at a critical time when the market was reaching its peak. But that is not the vast majority, right? It's not the vast majority that we would have expected to signal a 2026 crash, like would have been done in 2008 crisis. One of the things that's coming along, and this is breaking news, some changes in condominium underwriting guidelines. And so Fannie and Freddie announced several significant changes to their condominium underwriting guidelines, which lenders must follow when selling loans to government-sponsored entities. The changes affect both project review standards and insurance requirements for condominium projects and individual units. Following the Surfside condominium collapse, and this was a Miami-Dade condominium collapse in June of 2021, the GSEs substantially tightened condo underwriting standards, including reserve requirements, financial reviews, engineering studies, and insurance. So this was Florida law. This was Fannie updating their expectations on it. And these are new changes, generally ease some requirements for smaller projects while raising financial and insurance expectations for larger or more complex developments. Overall, the changes improve financial flexibility for small projects, but increase the documentation and compliance burdens for others. So let's go through a couple of these changes. The GSEs made several notable changes to project eligibility and review standards. Expand waiver of project review. New and established condo projects with 10 or fewer units may now qualify for a waiver of project review. Projects with 5 to 10 units must not be part of a master association or larger development. So I think one of the things we're looking for is ability to push through affordable housing units. Condominiums certainly could fit into that bill, and they historically have not because of the financial burden of condo fees and the ability to finance. So this is something it looks like we're trying to ease the burdens of. Elimination of the limited review process. Projects previously eligible for limited review must now undergo a full review unless they qualify for a waiver. Higher reserve requirements. Required reserves for capital expenditures and deferred maintenance increase from 10 to 15% of the annual budget for projects reviewed under the full review process. The requirement takes effect for full reviews beginning in January of 2027. Strict reserve study use. If a reserve study is used instead of a standard GSE benchmark, lenders must now rely on the highest recommended reserve amount in the study. Investor concentration changes. The 50% investor concentration cap is eliminated for established projects reviewed under full review. Presale requirements for new projects remain. So many condominiums, existing condominiums, a lot of this is in regards to new condominiums being built. Existing condominiums have traditionally not been able to be financed by conforming loans, ones that would be ultimately sold to the GSEs, Fannie, Freddie. One of the main reasons was because they always had this 50% investor concentration cap. You could not be buying one to live in and could have a conforming loan if the community as a whole was more than 50% owned by investors, not owner occupants. That is being foregone. Overnight, by the existence of this new law, we are going to see an opening of inventory that previously would not have been able to be purchased and lived in with conforming loans by potential occupants. So we may see investor, and a lot of these investor condos they don't pencil out great for investors um, because of what these reserve requirements have been when you start dealing with increasing, association fees, et cetera. And so a lot of these investors have been holding on to condos because they just, needed to get out. They couldn't get out of them, right? There was a smaller pool of prospective buyers. And so that is something that may change very quickly. A couple other key insurance updates here. Roofs no longer required to be insured at replacement cost. Roofs must still be insured, but policies now permit certain roof losses, typically wind or hail, to be settled on an actual cash basis. ACV accounts for depreciation and may result in claim payments that are significantly lower than cost to fully replace a roof. So some requirements there that are no longer going to be in place that allow them to actually maintain potentially lower reserves. And the challenge with that is as you replace a roof and you deplete your reserve account for that, now you've got to build that up and you've got to get your reserves back and you've got to insure a brand new roof against potential of full replacement. If you have some hail damage, that generally doesn't require full replacement. Could, but it allows them to start to really assess their risk a little differently. Higher allowable deductibles. Master property insurance policies may now include per unit deductibles of up to $50,000, provided unit owner carries supplemental coverage sufficient to cover the deductible amount. So that's fantastic. Simplified documentation of coverage sufficiency. Lenders may rely on insurer statement, appraisals, or other professional estimates to confirm that project is settled or replacement cost basis rather than independently documenting values. So what does this mean? Smaller condo projects may benefit from streamlined reviews and improved access to financing. Cool. Larger projects will face higher reserve and documentation expectations, which could increase HOA fees or result in special assessments. Greater insurance flexibility may reduce premium pressure on master association policies, but it may also shift cost to unit owners who may need to purchase supplemental coverage or face special assessments when insurance claims payments are insufficient to cover losses. Lenders will rely more heavily on HOA provided documentation, underscoring the importance of accurate budgeting, reserve studies, and insurance disclosures during a transaction. And then finally, condominium associations, mortgage market participants, and insurance carriers will need to coordinate more closely to ensure timely sharing of insurance information, particularly with respect to unit level coverage required to address deductible assessed by associations. At the end of all of this, there is a new accessibility to condos for your average buyer. I expect to see this start to at least impact some of the downward turn we're seeing in Southwest Florida. That is currently the black eye on all of Florida. Be very interesting over time to see where this really lands and how this new regulation starts to open up opportunities that weren't previously available to potential owner occupant borrowers. So with all that being said, hope this was helpful information. I'll see you next time.